Well, Greg, welcome to our very expensive studio here in deepest, darkest.
If only they knew.
Oh, if only they knew. No, but yeah, our paths have crossed, so we managed to do it together, which is always a bit better because I can prod you and banter you, and you can.
We are close enough.
Go. Yeah, no, and it's a beautiful sunny day, so there's a bit of shadowing around. But anyway, looking at Uncrewed today. I have to say that I was at Farnborough as you were. There's a lot of uncrewed stuff around there. Been a lot of announcements. We're going to get into that. But it struck me that the uncrewed thing is not new. One of my early operational tours was in the Gulf War with the British Army, and we had Phoenix was one of their uncrewed systems. 1986 that came in, replaced by Watchkeeper in 2002. So none of this stuff is actually new.
Yeah.
And I think that, then it was, we bought thousands of these things, sent them off. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work, some of them didn't come back, but it was sort of disposable. They did what they were told. Why is it happening now, do you think? Why is this whole advent of uncrewed suddenly becoming very topical?
Yeah.
And all of industry is suddenly piling into it. What's changed?
So I think a couple of things have changed. One is the environment has definitely changed. Ukraine has taught us the benefits and the perils of drones. So there's definitely that moment in time. I think the technology has moved on now. We are now seeing autonomy, genuine autonomy, arriving on the production line, and that has freed up the ability to operate these in a more contested environment, which of course in our day, certainly in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was largely benign counterinsurgency. We're now talking war fighting, which requires these things to be survivable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the survivability thing for me is key, because I do remember, particularly around one of my tours in Afghanistan, when looking at the dynamic targeting cell then, and things like Reaper, some of these long range, we need a pattern of life. We need to be able to watch if Osama bin Laden, is he in a building, but actually more importantly, is it full of children? And so they had to study the pattern of life legally to find out what was going on, and then you can make a judgment of whether you could strike it. And my bladder was never good past a couple of hours. I don't want to get into how you get to the bathroom in a fighter jet.
I have an 8-hour bladder.
Yeah, well, I can honestly, I never use one of the pee bags, mainly because just the effort of trying to get yourself unstrapped.
It's why no one would sit next to you in the crew room.
Well, you probably had somebody in the cockpit to help you out with it, whereas,
well, it was long enough to reach,
Yeah, right. Anyway, moving on. But the whole point was that, however sized a bladder, you couldn't watch for 24 hours. And having one of these things just droning around in circles, camera locked on, was just tedious, and therefore they were invaluable, absolutely invaluable. And if at any stage you had a dynamic target, if you had a missile on the wing of one of these things, off it went. But as you say, nobody could really shoot it down, and it was therefore. But of course, those 35 years of wars of choice, we're now into wars of national survival. But so do you think that's changed, or also the technology? Because it feels like this whole AI revolution, in other words, rather than just wind them up, point them out the door, that now there is the potential for these things to start to think for themselves.
So a couple of things have changed. I mean, this constant stare, I think as we used to refer to it, of iStar, where you can just put a drone over a piece of sky and just survey it for 24 hours or more. That still exists today. Of course, the chances of you staying overhead for that long in a contested environment are slim. And of course, space plays its part in that as well these days. What we're now talking about is more in the weapons side and the combat side. So we're talking about one-way drones that can just blow things up and never come back. Plenty of that going on in Ukraine. And also these reusable smart drones, which have a variety of different names. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute. But collaborative combat aircraft was definitely front and centre at Farnborough, which are effectively cheaper, uncrewed combat aircraft, able to do a lot of the same mission, but bring you, if you like, more numbers, so mass as people refer to it.
But I guess that's the nubble where I'm trying to get to with this. When they first came in, it felt they were done. They were wind up, send them off, do a mission. If they didn't come back,
or controlled by a
having a satellite link.
Yeah.
But I remember, I'll try and pull it up. But I remember some lovely footage of the Russian just slotting behind one of the MQ-9s, shooting out the sky because it can see behind only if somebody's looking.
I think it bent the propeller, didn't it?
Well, that was another one where it swept across the front of it.
Yeah,
but there's all sorts of, and it just showed just how vulnerable these things are.
Yeah, they're slow as well.
Yeah. So, and if they're in, as you say, a contested environment, I think. So one of the things that for me changed, we were chatting to Helsing, weren't we? And they've done this pretty interesting initiative with Saab Gripen, where they effectively wired the AI into, and therefore they have a safety pilot in there, but this thing can basically fly itself and do combat missions.
Yeah, and they've done it. Well, they did it in the simulator, which they can demo, but they've done it live in a real Gripen with a safety pilot in there, but allowing it to fly on its own. I think DARPA in the US did it a couple of years ago. It was largely synthetic, but it was all about whether a pilot could beat the machine. You know, going back to the old days of the chess machines.
Yes.
You know, when did Garry Kasparov finally lose to a machine? The only thing about that is, I'm a slight skeptic until I've seen otherwise. Is they're scripted. You know, it's either a one circle fight and it's about who can mechanically turn the aircraft faster than the other and get a pipper on. And I think they found that the pilots were obeying the training rules and the machine wasn't. So there's a little bit of machine learning there that's actually got ahead of us. It knew how to cheat more than we did. So there are mechanical things that you can get a machine to do, increase its reaction time. But of course, we're not talking about a single one-on-one dogfight here, or even a 2v2 dogfight. You're talking about a multi-spectral, multi-platform activity. And I think we're still waiting to see how a machine is going to cope in that type of environment, where there might be ethical decisions to make as well about who's good, who's bad, and whether you shoot or not.
Yeah, there's a whole mass in there, isn't there? But I know that's the Helsing initiative. I think there's all sorts of stories coming out of the pilots going, we just couldn't win. And that was quite...
Well, they paid by Helsing.
Yeah, but it was, you know, and however sceptical I think both of us will continue to be, if you look at the march of technology, you think when you and I were doing combat, I mean, the Harrier wasn't really a combat aircraft, but...
shot anyone down.
Yeah, right, in your dreams.
In my F-18, actually.
But it was all about three-dimensional chess, in fact, four-dimensional in a way, and trying to seduce the other guy. You know, as you say, you're in a circle fight. You'd hold the nose up with top rudder, so he'd think you were pulling like a bugger, but actually you weren't at all. You were accelerating. There's also some really clever mind games you can play in some of this, and I'm not quite sure in that really dynamic environment how well the machine will ultimately do. But they will learn all the time, and they won't make the mistakes that you and I would make.
So interestingly, a lot of those studies, I think the machine is being told where the adversary is via effectively a data link. A lot of the CCAs that we saw at Farnborough don't have their own sensors on board, so it doesn't have a radar. So it's relying on information coming from a third party. That could be space, it could be another manned or crewed platform. So there's all sorts of ways that perhaps the demonstrations have cheated. It's how you then turn that into a practical delivery. Because what you're actually asking a drone to do is turn up into a piece of airspace, find its own targets, distinguish who's good from bad, and then start working out who to shoot first. That's a very different prospect than just meeting nose to nose at 30 miles and going through some mechanical maneuvers. So it's a question now about how much quickly we can begin to put those algorithms into the machine.
Yeah, it's also, I don't know about you, but certainly the tone of people's voices also. You had your wingman, you were doing a 4v4, trying desperately to work out, keep an eye on who your good guys were, who the bad guys were, and then you'd hear somebody pulling a little G, and the tone of their voice, you could tell whether actually they weren't quite sure or whether they were okay but losing, and you react accordingly. And I just don't know how a machine will do that, whether or not it doesn't have to worry about that, but it's not going to have the same connectivity.
You are right. I mean, there's no doubt a formation that's worked up together, you start to build an instinct about how people react. Now, you could argue the machines won't have a different way of reacting. They'll all react the same way, so they'll know, if you like, it's totally mechanical. But the tone of someone's voice, you can detect how urgent somebody is getting. So there's a lot of things in there that you do with a crewed system that won't happen in an uncrewed, and I still don't yet know how reliant it is in a perfect network. So that network literally has to tell you where everything is. Once you know where everything is, you just do the computation and figure out what to do next. What if you don't know where everyone is? What if the sensor hasn't picked up a platform? What if the stealth platform doesn't tell you where it is and you don't detect it? So yeah, there's a lot of, which you can see with the naked eye. Well, won't be a naked eye in the CCA. So how does that work? So there's a lot of questions here.
And I think for me that we got to the number where my worry here is that I always both of us throughout our career have ended up having to do instructional duties as well. I was meant to be QFI for early years, but a weapons instructor later. I could teach my mother how to fly, up, down, left, right, faster, slower, but actually flying the jet is not, it's operating it, and it's all about situational awareness. So what do we mean by that? It's a bit like when you're driving a car for the first time, you can't talk and drive because you're trying to work out, whereas now you can do everything you want. And in the same sort of way, what makes a 4-ship leader, what makes a Kameo leader, it's your head is operating in the airspace, it's working out, it's sifting out what's going on from the AWACS, it's sifting out what's happening, looking at the weather ahead, making these incredibly complex decisions very, very rapidly. And you know that sometimes you can't hear the radio because it's masked. You sometimes can't hear your wingman, but you're making the best you can of the information you can. That situational awareness is your brain, your eyes, your ears, the tone, your training, everything. Where's that? If that's becoming reliant on this ecosystem, this digital web, that is its vulnerability.
It is. It'll be its strength and its weakness. I mean, as you just described, you build your spatial awareness by picking up clues, and the people who can build that picture and keep track of it. So in 5 minutes' time, that particular package of aircraft that was over there, where's it going to be now? So you're constantly upgrading your spatial picture. A machine, of course, will do that instantly if it's given the data, and that's the question. Where does it get its data from? Something's still got to be detected. You've then got to have a network that allows you to see all those things. Now, the good news is that these aeroplanes are now in production in America. They're being produced off the line. So presumably, without knowing the detail, America thinks they've cracked this problem to the point that they now become useful. I think what we are seeing, though, is that crewed platforms are still part of the mix. So I think that what that tells us is there is some concern about the safety of the network. There's also a recognition that these platforms, although they're clever, are still dumb in some respects, in that they are reliant on the information coming from something else. And that could well be the crewed platform or space or whatever. So there is a recognition that crewed and uncrewed are working together as a team. Because a lot of the criticism is, well, if the combat aircraft can do it on its own without a pilot now, why do I need a crewed airplane? Why do I need a Tempest or an F-47? And I think that's the bit that we're not going to know the detail of, because that will be super classified. But I think the fact that that's happening tells you that no, the systems need both here to work in tandem.
Yeah, because there's so many examples, but we used to operate over in Germany, or certainly latterly in the sort of North of England, with a big Bagwell 8 aircraft, 2 4-ships. You're going alone against air defenders and whatever. And sure enough, there'd be a sniff and you'd bomb burst. But if I'm the 4-ship leader at the back and you're the 8-ship leader at the front, I look at you before we walk and go, do you know, I think they're going to be attacking us here. I'll see you here. This is where I'm going to go. Don't be surprised if I come in down this valley. And therefore, you now know not to panic when you see a tiny dot on the horizon at your 7 o'clock, about the time you'd expect to see me, because now we've got an unwritten contract that we've just gone, do you know, on this day it smells like it's going to go wrong, and this is how we're going to work it out.
But as you well know, you and I operate in a world where data links were only just coming in. I mean, I had a bit of time on data links with F-18, but there was no data link with the Tornado till the day we left, and same on the Harrier. So you were reliant on either seeing or someone else telling you where it was. Of course, in this world that we're now in, you won't have to tell them you're coming down that valley. It will know already. It will know exactly where you are and where you're coming from. So, assuming, of course, the network's working. And I think it was Hart Smith that mentioned at the Chiefs Conference just a few weeks ago that, the ambition now to become the first 6th generation Air Force. That's really what he's talking about. He's talking about an Air Force that is now totally connected. That every moving part, whatever that might be, a slow-moving drone, a fast-moving drone, a crewed aircraft, an I-Star platform, whatever, everybody knows what everyone else is doing, and the entire thing is then coordinated, either through algorithms or by somebody sitting on that loop directing activity. And I think that's the question we also don't know the answer to. To what extent will these drones, let's call them drones, to what extent will they be controlled by another crewed aircraft? Do they just need to be given an area to go to? Do they need to be given a specific task? Do they need to be given a target? Or do you just say, there's bad guys over there, off you go, let loose? So there's a few questions left yet as to how the ConOps will work in practice and how capable these platforms will be in prosecuting things on their own.
I think so, because we'll come back to Harv in a second, but that whole commander's intent. So with humans, you're my 8-ship lead. I now understand your commander's intent when I go and fly. And when no plan survives contact with the enemy, but actually when it's shit in a handbag, you go, right, let's go, and everything's bomb burst, the weather's rubbish and whatever, but we still know that we're going to find a way to make it work. Because I understand, even if I can't talk to you, even if I haven't got that data link, I can still make it work because I understand commander's intent. And that means devolving authority, responsibility, accountability to your wingman, and that's what all the training goes about. I'm just wondering how far we're prepared to go philosophically by giving commander's intent to a drone and then letting AI.
Well, commander's intent in the future is going to be a line of software code with a set of I'm not a software code writer, but priority 1, hit the target X. Priority 2, make sure I come home. But if priority 1 is going to override priority 2, you are to follow priority 2. So you're going to have a series of sequences written in there that's going to try and tell it, okay, should I do this or should I do that? Because when it comes right down to it, what's my priority? Or you control it. Now that's going to demand, so your 8-ship now is going to be 7 drones and 1 crewed platform. Do you expect that one person in a single seat cockpit to be controlling 7 other platforms doing their own thing? That's probably too demanding.
But I think that's something that you and I, we brought that up when we were down at Farnborough because, I know you were gods of the sky, but in my little single seat Harrier, I found it hard work. I mean, it's hard work trying to lead big packages. You've got a lot going on and you're on your own. If you now say, right, you're now responsible for a lot of other aeroplanes, I'm looking going, how the hell does that happen? But actually, people who know say, no, it's less about that. It's more choreographing them and giving commanders intent, which they already have. They suck the information they need and then they go off and do what they need to do. They know what you're trying to do and therefore they are complementing that. They're part of the team. But it does sound a big ask, and that's what we're going to end up visiting. I think we're going to pick this up again, aren't we? Because we're going to visit a couple of the big players in the UK.
Yeah, definitely.
So we better understand how that's all going to happen.
Yeah, when you look at any particular role, so if your drone is carrying a couple of bombs against a specific target, that's relatively simple to do. Here's your target, this is the weapon parameters, go do it. It's dead simple. You could even give an aeroplane a couple of air-to-air missiles and say, look, any bad guy, shoot him down. So in isolation, each of those roles can be defined. And if you've got a platform that's a EW, like a Storm Shroud, that's going to do some jamming, say, I want you to do some jamming here on that particular system that we've just detected. Or if you see a higher priority system, jam that instead. So in isolation, you can give all these drones specific tasks. But and I know that as war starts to crumble in front of your face, that changes. So how do you write the algorithm that then adapts? The target's actually been taken out by someone else, or it's moved, or suddenly there are different airplanes in the air. It's how do you cope with that complexity that is the question. You can do these scenarios, and so the demos that we've all been to see are scripted, clear and simple priorities. When you start to add multiple layers of complexity, how are you going to either control it through that or give it an algorithm to be able to think that through?
And it's all those algorithms that I suppose over time will gradually get there. But I remember, in fact, our chief of the air staff, he and I have operated together, and I admired him one of his operational tours because on the day, bomb in the air, guiding it, he then recognised that the situation on the ground had changed and therefore guided the weapon away from the target. And you go, wow, that was a judgment call. There was no right or wrong, no black and white. I don't know how you'd write an algorithm that covered that, but his instinct was, this doesn't feel right anymore, and therefore I need to do something about it. And ultimately warfare is a human endeavour. What I love is the stories of the Second World War where we shoot down a German baron, but we take him to the officers' mess, give him a big meal and a couple of shots of whiskey because we admired that man-on-man, as it was at the time, gladiatorial battle. As soon as you make it a computer, CYBERDYNE technologies, Judgment Day, I just wonder how you can get the code that covers the ethical angles as well.
I mean, I think that is the big question, isn't it? That you can make these machines as perfect as possible, but this entire ethical or moral dilemma of, do you really want to let a machine make those decisions? So the whole concept of autonomous weapons. Now, we have autonomous weapons today, whether anybody likes it or not. So a goalkeeper gun on the back of a ship, you can say, shoot at anything that comes at me, even if it is a friendly helicopter. You can target a brimstone to go and find a tank, and it could be theirs or ours. But as long as you fight in the right direction at the bad guys, in theory, you're going to hit the right thing. So we have had autonomy for some time. The question is, how much further are you prepared to go? Are you really going to launch a drone on day one of a war and say, we don't know what's happening, we're not quite sure what's up, we've given you the algorithms of all the bad guys, just go find one. I don't care where it is. Next thing you know, it's wandered 200 miles in the other direction into another country or whatever it might be. Now, all of those rules can be written to bound all those things up, but it has to be perfect.
So, coming to the real world now, I mean, despite all of our misgivings, and I accept that we're both Neanderthal, relics of a
Turkey's
bygone
vote for
era.
Christmas. Yeah.
But the Chief of the Air Staff was pretty passionate that he talked about a storm is coming.
Yeah.
And it was advertising this whole new range of investments in this technology.
Yeah.
He talked about 6th generation, and I'm really interested to hear what your interpretation of what he means by that, because there's a lot of misunderstanding around that.
Yeah.
But also a new family of these uncrewed vessels, and it felt quite early to be making the call about going into manufacture.
Yeah.
And yet, he was very reassuring where he said he had the same misgivings, but he saw what the Americans were doing. We need to be on this. So, first of all, what was your take of what he means by 6th generation?
So 6th gen, I sort of hinted at it earlier, it is about a much more encompassing use of the network and the data. We do that today. We did it on 4th generation, but you and I, we just agreed, didn't have much of a data link. But you might have, mode 4 IFF. You would have certain things that would assist you in making sure you didn't do the wrong thing. And data links were beginning to arrive, and as long as you had the link, you could see what was going on. 5th gen has taken that to another level. That is now taking in multiple sensors and systems, building a much more complex picture and knitting that all together. But it's quite data hungry. 6th gen, the way I've had it explained to me, particularly in terms of Tempest, which is the GCAP platform, is much more about taking that data on board, processing that data, and then passing it back out into the network. So it's a much more sophisticated two-way street. Whereas at the moment, 5th gen is very much a one-way, quite selfish approach to data. 6th gen is the ability to genuinely share that, and we've heard other expressions of that. The digital targeting web is another manifestation of that, where you will be able to pass data between multiple users that can be used multiple times by different platforms. So for me, 6th gen, it's probably how you run yourself at home. Whereas the good old days, you had a mobile phone, you had this, that, the other. Now everything is on your phone. More importantly, you can do everything on it. I think, so we've kind of gone 6th gen at home. We're literally, and then you lose your phone and you're completely buggered. And I think that's not a bad analogy, that you are super able to do everything right up until the point that it goes, and then you can do nothing.
I've heard several different. One of them with the 5th gen was stealth. In other words, I want to get close to somebody before they hurt me. 6th gen became, okay, we've got stealth, but now we just need to be better in this data highway. We need to make more sense of what we've got and be a node in this big data system, and that's the explanation as to why one pilot's going to be able to control lots of stuff, because actually you're going to be able to pull so much more stuff from around you.
Yeah, and you're not operating the aeroplane as you and I used to. A lot of that now is all presented to you. The aeroplane theory will almost fly itself. That's why we've already get to the point that drones can do that. Yeah. So you will have more capacity, and you'll have you and I. You were lucky to have a display more than a few inches wide. These guys and girls are going to have literally 3 iPads sat in front of them.
It's what's presented, isn't it? I mean, I do look back at the cockpits we had full of dials, and you had an oil pressure, and you had a jet pipe temperature, and you go, because it was supervised and stuff. Now you go, do I need to know what the oil pressure is? All I need to know is if it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And therefore, if the kit is monitoring all that stuff for you,
Yeah.
all you need is the stuff that enables you to do your mission.
Yeah.
Everything else is being monitored for you. And then, whether the checklist of the things you have to do when an oil pressure light comes on,
Yeah.
if the system knows what to do, it just gets on and does those.
It's because we have too many Cure-5s, you know that. we couldn't let it go.
Them were the days. Anyway, so back to the chief. There were a number of platforms that we talked about.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's not a lot known about each of them, but
Yeah.
Storm Fighter, it felt like, was the tip of the sword.
Yeah.
Part of the sort of collaborative combat aircraft. That was the jet end of the collaborative combat aircraft. I had a few questions about this because it was probably the most expensive of the ones that we saw. There was a bit of chat about it potentially being a 20 million.
Yeah, plus or minus.
And you went, holy shamoly, that is not a disposable aeroplane.
No.
You know, that is, so it's got to be pretty much the same capability as the manned variant we've got at the moment. Otherwise, you're paying a hell of a lot of money for losing control. Every now and again I watch these Chinese drone displays, always looks fantastic, and then somebody flicks a switch and they all start falling out of the sky. And I sort of think, do I want my defence budget to be spent there? What do we know about this Storm Fighter? Where do we think that's going to fit?
So we saw it, didn't we, in the middle of the Farnborough week, and it was in the middle of the week because there wasn't a Prime Minister on the Monday, so it all got delayed, and Wes Streeting did the grand opening. Brontanax, if I get my Norwegian right, or whatever it was, because it means Thunder God or something like that. That's the Storm Fighter, which was heralded at the Chiefs Conference the week before. But now we're talking, and what was announced at Farnborough was a date, and that date is next year. Because BAE Systems went to a great deal of length of trouble to say that is not a development platform, that is a pre-production model. In other words, we already know what it looks like, we're ready to press and let the machines run. So we could well be seeing that aeroplane flying next year. The rumours are it could well be flown in a NATO exercise. And they want to make a fuss about it, let's be honest. But why has it come about now? I think there's two reasons it's come about now for the Royal Air Force. One is the technology now, and Harv Smith tells us he's been there and seen it, is now at the point where it is ready to go. You've seen a number of production models in the US. In fact, just this week they've announced, I think, 3 different types are now in production with hundreds ordered. So the presses are running. We don't yet know how capable they are, but let's wait and see how that plays out. I think the UK is in a slightly different position. It's betting on one contender, so it's got to work. Otherwise, we're going to be buying American because no one else is yet building these, not to that level of sophistication. So that it's ready is the first different factor. The second reason is we know from the dip there is not massive amounts of cash flooding into defence. Certainly not for the first few years. A little bit of money for Typhoon upgrade. No more F-35s currently on order. And Tempest still quite some time away. So the only way you're going to build in a bit more capability and a bit more mass is through these platforms. And I think what we don't yet know is how good they will be at doing that and what value that 20, 25 million quid, whatever it turns out to be, brings. Now, if it's a quarter of the price for a quarter of the capability, he said doing maths in public, that doesn't really give you much change in benefit. You could have gone and bought a manned platform and done the same thing. So it's going to be interesting to see here what delta that produces. If it's a quarter of the price and produces half the capability of a Typhoon or an F-35, now you're going to see the investment pay off. And however many weapons or missiles these systems carry, and looking at the size of them, size of the bomb bay, it's going to be a couple of air-to-air missiles, a couple of small bombs. And then the question is how does that then work in tandem with a Typhoon and F-35 and eventually with a Tempest? And does that give you greater probability of an effect over a target?
Yeah, the very way we talk about this just makes me nervous, I think. That's the trouble. Because I know it's not what you said, but it sounds like we're going down this path because we can't afford the real thing. And my worry there is we do have choices in this country. Our defence is around alliances. And therefore, even if we couldn't have quite as many of the pointed end, if that's what we need as an alliance, we could have a lot of those. If we go down the path where we now compromise our high-end, some would call it exquisite capability, and that is a risk to our overall combat effectiveness, That's a real worry for me. Now, it may well be, there are advocates out there, certainly some of the guys like Helsing would be going, actually, these things will be better than you are.
Yeah.
And you just have to get over it. Stop being a Luddite. You're an old aircrew Luddite. But you and I spent a good part of our careers at war or in conflict at some way or another, and you can't afford to do it.
No, and I think it's not about being a Luddite, and I know why people make that criticism. It's about whether you can take the risk now. And I think that is a fair criticism. I think the UK is in a different position than the likes of America. America can afford to ride 2 horses or 3 or 4 horses at once. And if one fails and turns out not to work, fine, I've got 2 more in the running. And that's exactly the case at the moment. And I'm still buying F-15EXs, F-35s et al. And I'm still F-22. So their risk is not as great. And the reward when it works is such that you're now the startup. You're the one that's adopted that early, and you can be off and running. True for both the Air Force and for industry, because now you've cornered the market. So I think in the UK we're going through a difficult challenge here. We've got a challenge of money today for defence, but we also want to be seen as a 6th gen Air Force and therefore be an early adopter. And so at some point you have to go, okay, on judgment, it is safe enough to do that now. I think, because we're not, if we were ripping money out of the F-35 budget and the Typhoon budget and leaving them literally fallow, I think that would probably be a step too far. We're not doing that. We are keeping those going. We are upgrading them. There's still a debate about how many more F-35s we will buy, but the production line is running, so that's fine. Yeah. So it's not like we've taken a route and it's a cul-de-sac and there's no return. But I think the next couple of years are going to be critical. So if that Brontanax and those other drones begin to demonstrate on exercises the genuine value, then we'll have made the right choice. And if the UK is now able to sell Brontanax as an export model in competition with American models, that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah, I guess a part of it is also, I go back and forth to Ukraine, when I can, and you study the way that drones have morphed almost overnight. They're constantly changing. Yeah. And you and I both get bantered a little bit on media about, so why isn't the British government buying, a warehouse full of drones for infinite? And when you follow the logic through, you say, well, though if you bought them today, in 2 years' time, the hardware will be completely out of date, and actually the software is out of date almost the next day. Yeah. So why would you do that? Yeah. So what you need to be doing is keeping investment in industry that's constantly evolving the capability behind, and know that you can bring them into production fairly swiftly, but also use training in a virtual world to test the capability that you have and the capability you want to have. If we could have a Klingon death ray, what difference would that make? And therefore, it feels like the danger of committing to a production run is that you're putting a peg in the sand today of something that actually may not be the answer.
So that is an entirely valid criticism. So what we're seeing in Ukraine, for example, is the cheap and cheerful drones literally evolving in days, hours. But of course they have to, because they're relatively easy to shoot down. So actually the way they operate means they're incredibly vulnerable to a very small change in tactics. If you look at these CCAs, there's a number of things that these CCAs do that have been vital to air power since the year dot. Speed, not stealth admittedly, but inability to be seen, certainly in the last 10 years. Your ability to fly long distances and your ability to carry large payloads. So if you can design a drone that's got relatively good payload, decent range, decent speed, and decent stealth characteristics, it's not going to go out of date in 5 minutes. Those will continue to be valid unless somebody invents a wonder weapon. Well, the wonder weapon's not there yet, so let's wait and see. But those processes take decades, as we've always seen with combat platforms, and we've been able to make them operate for 30 years and upgrade them, change the sensors, change the systems. So this high-end tier 3, whatever you want to call them, drone has the characteristics that will allow it to be relevant into the future, albeit with tweaks. It is not the type of drone that literally next week there's going to be a new EW gun that drops it out of the sky. Now, I might be wrong. The world might be accelerating to this point now, but even crude platforms or sophisticated platforms will go out of date quickly. But I still think those fundamental tenets of speed, range, and payload and penetration continue to be valid qualities.
So the Storm range of platforms, Storm Fighter we talked about,
Yeah.
seem to be jets, seem to sort of keeping up with the pack type thing.
Well, and beyond. I mean, I think they're talking way beyond an F-35 range.
Yeah, but then you look at Storm Shroud, some
Yeah.
of the other parts of that Storm family,
Yeah.
a lot slower. That Storm Shroud is talking about being jamming enemy radars, which is blinding enemy radars. And I was chatting to somebody at the BAES Norton event about all this, and he was really excited about it.
Yeah.
And I wanted to drag you into the conversation because I went, the suppression of enemy air defences and destruction of enemy air defences, a role that you have done in the past.
Yeah.
And also harm missiles, that anti-radiation missiles that go after jammers.
Yeah.
So you've got this little thing, put, jam, put, jam, schwack. Oh, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
I just wonder, that whole role is a bit more nuanced than simply sending something in a petrol engine piston thing to go out and start jamming radars.
Yeah, I just take that analogy one step further, and I'll come back to Storm Shadow. But if that platform costs 5k, 10k, doesn't it cost a bit more than that?
Yeah.
And used up all the enemy's missiles before I got there, as far as I'm concerned, it's done its job.
Yeah.
So yes, and so the truly attritable disposable drones might just act as a decoy, and their job is just to get shot at and waste enemy missiles. We've already seen in Iran and in Ukraine that you can end up using very expensive Patriot missiles against Shahed drones. So there is an economy here that's at play. I think this is where people get a little bit confused. So a lot of these drones have been called loyal wingmen, and people get into their heads that all these drones therefore must fly alongside your crew platform. And I think that would be the case with something like a Brontanax. Brontanax will be capable of keeping up with an F-35 and going as far, if not further. Storm Shadow doesn't operate like that. Storm Shadow just needs to be in the right place at the right time. And you don't need to launch it from the airfield you've launched from. It's going to be launched from a field as close as you can get to the front. There's no mistake while the regiment are operating it. And as long as they press the button and let it take off to get to its target on time, that can be 3 hours before you take off. So it's about a much more complex coordination challenge. It is about doing that Balbo or Cameo composite air operations, where everything doesn't have to launch. You know, I've done red flag. Everybody launches from Nellis, goes up, holds, waits, goes in, comes out, lands at the same place. And the hardest thing was coordinating getting in and out. Well, now all these constituent parts will launch from wherever they need to launch from. And if they're slow, launch early, or if you've got a short range, get closer.
Well, we were using the example, weren't we, of the Queen's birthday flight past.
Yeah.
You know, the public see all these aircraft flying in a beautifully arranged formation, but they've all got airborne from different locations.
Yeah.
They all fly at different speeds.
And all come in from different lines.
Different angles.
Yeah.
But what you see as you
at
have
the
the
moment
target,
in time,
it's all beautifully sequenced.
Correct.
And I think that's probably where the future for these platforms is.
They also think we're really clever at knowing at what time the royal family come out on the balcony, but I know this is that it's a job of one officer to get them out on the balcony when the aeroplane's coming. So
the last bit of this was also just going, a lot of this conversation almost sounds like it's the dawn of a completely different era, end of the manned, start of the unmanned. But I think there's a very different story actually between the blend of what 6th gen actually will make 4th gen and 5th gen more relevant rather than less relevant, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I know this from deep experience, is when we first brought F-35 into the inventory and started operating it with Typhoons in tandem, we saw not only was the F-35 getting a better kill ratio, the Typhoon was getting a better kill ratio because it was benefiting from the confusion that the F-35 was sowing. And now that the enemy doesn't know where everyone is and wonders where all these missiles are coming from, the Typhoon could suddenly take advantage of that discombobulation, if you like, of the enemy. So it'll only increase, and that's the beauty of, if you can afford 4 times as many of these Brontanax types aeroplanes, you're going to create four times the dilemma. Plus they're stealthy and they're armed. So any enemy facing that is going to be going, right, what do I do? Who do I shoot first? And whilst all that confusion's going on, even a 4th gen aeroplane is going to be able to take advantage of that. So yeah, I think that this, if you like, gives a whole new future life of 4th gen.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, my final reflection, I think, would be that going back to Farnborough, I was using the little shuttles, because it's quite a long distance between one and the other if you've got different appointments during the day.
Yeah.
And I was sat next to an old boy, and his water dropped out of the sort of golf cart.
He tells this same story. He said he was sat next to this old boy. He had to use the golf cart.
Stop it. Anyway, I jumped up, picked up his water. Oh, thank you. And we got chatting, and he said it was his 70th Farnborough.
Yeah.
And he was in his 90s, and but still a massive fan. I said, "How's it changed over the years?" And he said, "Well, we didn't have many foreigners then." I thought, okay. But he meant it was a showcase of British.
Right, it was in those days, yeah.
And he said, so it's a bit smaller, but he had a lot more aeroplanes. I looked around and he went, because it was all British manufactured aeroplanes and lots of propeller.
Yeah.
And I looked around and he said, now there's not so many aeroplanes, they're all jet powered. But as I wandered around, actually, we're coming back, there's a lot more propeller operation, and they're all around these drones.
Yeah, no, it's very true. It's funny how, I think, when everyone gets excited about drones, not much has changed.
No.
Look at the V1 rocket at the Second World War. That's what's being fired by Ukraine now into Russia. In many ways, we're almost going back to the beginning, aren't we? You're talking about aeroplanes that are flying over the battlefield at 150 miles an hour. Well, that sounds like the Red Baron.
Yeah, and I think the only difference for me is, and that's where I go back to that sort of AI thing, is that we're seeing the platforms actually going back to platforms that have been around for ages. The difference is the brain, because now AI is bringing a very different look, and I think we're at the sort of dawn of a whole new advent of technology and capability.
I think it's definitely the AI element which has allowed a whole new sort of capabilities to come in, but it's also the fact that actually that low tech does have a place. As we're seeing in Ukraine, low tech can actually provide quite a different way of effort if you employ it cleverly. So everything doesn't have to be at supersonic speeds at 50,000 feet and stealthy, as long as you don't mind it not coming back, and as long as it can achieve its effect. So I think people refer to it as this low-high mix, and I think that's what we're coming round to now. We've been on this constant journey of better, faster, quicker. Now there's a recognition that, so that still has its place, but there are other things you can do, particularly close to the battlefield, that do not need the high levels of sophistication and, more importantly, the high levels of cost.
So do you think in 30 years' time there'll still be manned fighters?
Oh, that's a really good. Well, crewed, of course. We must keep using crewed. 30 years. You've picked a good date there. I think there is the possibility that there wouldn't be, because I think the technology will have got to the point that it is possible to remove the crew from the aircraft, even if you have it sat a million miles away on the loop. The question is, morally, are we ready to make that leap? Because what that's going to, and of course, what we need to think about here is what the unintended consequence of that will be. If war has become robots, and everything's fought at arm's length, then the war's going to be fought at home. It's going to be out that window. It's going to be back at home is where and so we're talking about a whole new way of warfare, maybe not that old actually, if you go back in time, or not that new, where actually it's now the home base that becomes the target. And you're no longer fighting as we would have done in a deployed or forward-looking sense. So it fundamentally changes the character of warfare, and I don't know if we are all fully prepared for that.
We will be a couple of old warthogs by that stage, won't we?
Yeah.